New Norm is brought to you by Winning at Home. I'm Steve Norman. Welcome to the New Norm. So I'm trying to read through the Bible, and currently I'm in the book of 1 Corinthians. And a couple days ago, I read this passage. There's some really fascinating stuff in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. The Apostle Paul says, "It is actually reported that there is sexual immorality among you, and of a kind that even pagans do not tolerate. A man is sleeping with his father's wife, and you are proud. Shouldn't you rather have gone into mourning and have put out of your fellowship the man who's been doing this? For my part, even though I'm not physically present, I am with you in spirit, and as one who is present with you in this way, I have already passed judgment in the name of our Lord Jesus on the one who has been doing this. So when you are assembled, and I am with you in spirit, and the power of our Lord Jesus is present, hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved on the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast, so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the people of this world who are immoral, or the greedy, or swindlers, or idolaters. In that case, you'd have to leave this world. But now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral, or greedy, an idolater, a slanderer, a drunkard, or a swindler. Do not even eat with such people." It's a pretty loaded passage, and it's not one that you will hear kind of selected for a sermon on any given day from most churches that I've ever been a part of. But there are a couple verses here that jump out to me and I think require or demand some context. 3 in particular. The first one is this line in verses 4 and 5 that says, "Hand this man over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved." First, when he talks about the flesh, he's not talking about his physical body. He is talking about his sinful nature. So when Paul contrasts flesh and spirit, he's talking about the kind of two domains that we can either choose to live in, either under the authority and the inspiration and the empowerment of the Spirit, or if we kind of default to our basic sin nature, which is driven by self and ego and lust and pride and all of those other things. So he says, hand this man over to Satan. And the whole idea of being handed over is not new to Paul. In fact, also in that same week, I was reading from Psalm 81, and there's this fascinating line in Psalm 81, verses 10 through 12, that reads like this. God says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it. But my people would not listen to me. Israel would not submit to me, so I," and here it is, "gave them over to their stubborn hearts to follow their own devices." There's that line again. I gave them over. It's interesting, in Paul's backstory, when Paul was an enemy of the early followers of Jesus, he was present at the murder of Stephen, one of the first martyrs for the Christian community. And on the day that Stephen was killed, he actually gave this speech. It's recorded in Acts chapter 7. He says, "Our ancestors, Israel, refused to obey him, God. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. They told Aaron, 'Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who led us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him.' That was the time they made an idol in the form of a calf, and they brought sacrifices to it and reveled in what their own hands had made." And here it is again. "But God turned away from them and gave them over to the worship of the sun and moon and stars." We read it again in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. He says, "Timothy, my son, I'm giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them you may fight the battle well, holding on to faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and so have suffered shipwreck with regard to the faith. Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander," here it is again, "whom I have handed over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme." And then finally we see it again in Romans chapter 1, another letter that Paul wrote. It makes multiple appearances. He says, "They," people who had known the truth of God but walked away from it, "exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their heart. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Verse 26, because of all this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind so that they do what ought not to be done. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. Paul's painting a picture of what happens when people given the choice to trust God and follow him, or turn to their own desires, or worship things that are other than God or less than God, like where that road ends. And it's a dark and desperate picture. And so this whole idea of being handed over is almost a celebration of free will. It's almost as if God is saying, I'm not going to twist your arm. I'm not going to make you trust me. I'm not going to make you honor me. I'm not going to make you follow me. You can do what you want. But if you do that, I'm gonna release you to walk that journey out to its natural end. And it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for your mind. It's not going to be good for your relationships. It's not going to be good for your heart. But if you want to, I will let you go. You can run that out and see where it takes you. And there's this great line from the Chuck Palahniuk novel that just says, yeah, you can do that. Let me know how that works out for you. We read again, another verses to take note of in 1 Corinthians 5 again. It says, your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be a new unleavened batch as you really are. He goes, therefore, let us keep the festival not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Paul is saying that yeast is the ingredient that it doesn't have to come in large quantities to change the entire nature of a batch of dough. And here Paul is saying, like, if the yeast of rebellion, or if the yeast of idolatry, or the yeast of complete and total disregard for God takes root in a community, he's like, it's only a matter of time before it's tainted with malice, which is hostility towards God and other people, and wickedness. And so what Paul is like urging the Corinthian church to do is to identify wrongdoing, to name misconduct when it surfaces, to call it out, and to set boundaries around it so that it doesn't infect and pollute the entire community. And then it closes with this line, verses 12 and 13. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? And then he goes on to say, God will judge those outside. You need to expel the wicked person from among you. And that last line in my Bible, I'm reading in the NIV, is in quotes, expel the wicked person from among you. And then there's a little footnote. And the footnote has references to Deuteronomy 13:5, 17:7, 19:19, 21:21, 22:21 and 24, and 24:7. So this whole idea of expelling a wicked person from among you is a recurring theme in the book of Deuteronomy. He says that you should remove that person from the community if they are somebody who claims to be a prophet and says, let's follow other gods. Or if you catch somebody who's worshiping other gods, or if you catch somebody who's acting as a malicious witness. In that era, in that context, to bear false witness didn't just mean to tell a white lie. It meant to testify against another person in a court of law in such a way that they could potentially receive the death sentence. So to bear false witness, the stakes are really, really high. If you were lying and the result of your lie took another person's life, that was unconscionable. He also says if somebody's acting as a rebellious son, not as a child, but as an adult, remove that person from the community. If somebody's guilty of sexual immorality, remove that person from the community. If somebody's guilty of kidnapping, remove that person from the community. He's saying, I need you to do this so that the offender can know how horrific their actions are, and so that the community can be recalibrated. They can be reset in their understanding of what is true and what is right and what is good and what is God honoring. And that line has been kind of haunting me those last couple lines from 1 Corinthians 5 that says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge the outside. And I don't know what your experience has been, but mine, at least lately, has been that in church circles, people seem primed, ready, willing, almost excited to judge those outside the church. Because when we judge people who are outside of the church community, we have nothing invested. We've got nothing to lose. It's almost like what they call in philosophy a straw man argument. It's easy to flick down people for offenses that are for things that we're not tempted to do. So we end up attacking people that we don't know and hold them accountable to standards that they don't even care about. We complain that they're not hitting a bar that they never even said they were committed to hitting. But things get sticky when we try to hold those within the community of faith accountable. It's considered impolite. It's considered uncouth. And maybe, especially in a small town, it is considered to be politically and socially unadvised. And you might hear this to say, like, well, see, this is a little confusing because it seems like we're called to hold people accountable for behavior that compromises their spiritual walk and that has the opportunity to hurt a local or broader body of believers. So what do we do about that? Like, how do we hold that verse, what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 5, how do we hold that in tension with what Jesus said about, like, judge not lest ye be judged? We're not supposed to judge other people, right? And I remember a college professor of mine, a guy by the name of Ron Collymore, he always said this. He goes, I'm not a judge. I'm a fruit inspector. I love that line because he said a judge is somebody who tries to call out the intentions of another person's heart. And the truth is, I don't know the intentions of your heart. Shoot, I'm rarely conscious of the intentions of my own heart. But what I can do is I can examine behavior. And I can observe behavior. And when necessary, I can and should call out behavior. Russ Laraway has this interesting model for giving feedback in the corporate settings. So if you're a manager and you're overseeing an employee, he says this, always use this formula. It's called SBI. He goes, so if somebody's done something that you're not excited about, paint the situation. That's the S. Tell them where they were and who was involved when the behavior happened. He goes, then the next one is behavior. Name the specific action that they committed or that they were involved with, and then name the impact. Say, as a result of that behavior, here was the result. Here was the negative ripple effect on a person, on a community, or in this case, in the church. Situation, behavior, and impact. Here's the where and the who. Here is the what, and then here is the result. And the truth is, it is easier for us to judge people outside of the family of God than it is to judge people on the inside. It is harder to turn the focus inward than it is to turn it outward. But Paul says we don't have any business wasting time or energy or words judging people outside the church. He goes, that's not your business. He goes, you're supposed to judge the people on the inside. God will take care of the rest. So he says, as a community, you stand on your business and let God sort out everybody else's. This week, my wife Kelly and I were having dinner. A couple of our kids were working, but one of our daughters and her boyfriend were home, and we were having dinner together. And we were recalling a conversation that we had about a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Sean, who, when he was living in Michigan, he found out that a friend of his who was married, the wife was having a inappropriate, not yet fully consummated physical affair, but definitely inappropriate relationship with a guy that she knew from her high school days, I believe, who was a pastor in a different state. Sean found out about this on a Sunday, and he was completely heartbroken, and then realized that he was going to be traveling to that state later that week for work. So he found out where this guy was a pastor, found out that they were having a midweek prayer meeting, showed up unannounced to the prayer meeting. He said there were only like 8 or 9 other people there. And then when the meeting was over, he pulled the pastor aside and he confronted him. And he goes, I know about this behavior. I'm seeing the impact that it's having on people that I care about. You are in a position of spiritual authority. He goes, this isn't good for your marriage. It's not good for her marriage. It's not good for your spiritual credibility or your spiritual authority. He goes, this has to stop. He goes, you got 48 hours. He goes, you can tell your elders or I will. And it wasn't a veiled threat. He wasn't trying to shame the guy, but he was trying to do what Paul was encouraging to do, was to hold the community of faith, especially spiritual leaders in the community of faith, to a high bar. Because that's what God deserves. And that's what the gospel is worth. The New Norm is produced and distributed by Winning at Home. Winning at Home is a faith-based nonprofit committed to making individuals, couples, families, and businesses stronger through counseling. For more information, visit winningathome.com. I'm your host, Steve Norman. Thanks for listening.